This Child Research and Policy Institute produces an annual report called the South African Child Gauge. The Child Gauge is used to measure, among other things, the progress of children and their development. This year, the focus was on early childhood development, or ECD.
And when we talk about ECD, for most people, they think about ECD centres and early learning programs. But what the gauge says is we need to be thinking much more comprehensively about child well-being, and we need to be intervening really, really early in the life and development of a child. So when we talk about early childhood development, we're talking about a whole package of services and support that should be in place from conception until the time a child enters formal schooling. That includes maternal and child health services, starting in the antenatal period, so care and support for pregnant women, because we know already that infant brain is developing in utero. So we need to get that foundation right, and then we need to continue that support all the way up to the beginning of formal school.
A lack of proper early childhood development has an impact on the brain of a child, as Lake explains.
Knows that the infant brain is primed to develop in response to its immediate environment and its relationship with caregivers. So a child who grows up in a home or a family where there's adequate nutrition, there's what we call responsive caregiving, a caregiver who is really attuned to the needs of the child, is checking in to see, is the child hungry, does the child need to be changed, who picks up the child and comforts them. All those things are good for brain development. They build trust, they build confidence, and they promote early learning and good health and nutrition.
Also touched on how poverty and the lack of proper nutrition affects the proper growth of children.
Seeing in South Africa is we're seeing very, very high rates of stunting, with more than 1 in 4 young children stunted. So they're so chronically malnourished, they are short for age, and that chronic malnutrition is also compromising their brain development. So these children are more likely to struggle with learning, cognitive development. They're going to progress more slowly through school, and that starts to impact, of course, on their employment prospects later in life, and it feeds what we call an intergenerational cycle of poverty, malnutrition, and of course inequality in the South African setting.
2 years ago, it was found that more than 70% of young children were living below the poverty line. And not every child gets to grow up in a space where proper nutrition is available.
No, are under strain. We're seeing rising rates of child poverty. In 2022, we were looking at 71% of young children living below the upper bound poverty line in households with a per capita monthly income of less than 1,558 rand. And that's simply not enough. They don't have enough to meet the basic costs of raising a child.
One of the proposals in the Child Gauge report is for government to increase social grant for children to bring it in line with the food poverty line.
Okay, so one of the things that the Child Gauge report is recommending is for us to increase the value of the child support grant to the food poverty line. So at the moment, the grant is worth 530 rand per child per month. And that's not really enough to even buy a loaf of bread, or you might be able to buy a loaf of bread, or you might be able to buy a litre of milk. You wouldn't be able to buy both of those things. So it's hugely concerning that the value of that grant is so low, and it's falling way below the food poverty line of 760 rand per person per month. So it means that it's not enough to meet the nutritional needs of a child.
Children affected by poor nutrition are living in poor households. In Langa on the Cape Flats, this vegetable garden, which was a dumping site, is helping to feed children.
So here in the soup kitchen, we have got for the kids. After school, they are coming to dish. We waste those smaller ones. From age of 5 years up until to 10 years, we are busy with those children, and above 10 years. And also elderly people, we are supporting them.
This Good Samaritan says some support to cultivate and maintain the garden will come in handy.
We need support for government, and also we need the boreholes for the water to pump on the ground, because we are struggling to get water. We need to get here inside, to get the water inside. We ask to the community for here, because also I stay there, and then we take water there.
Working with other community members, the garden contributes to the development of children in the area. However, many of those who assist with early childhood development in the area face additional challenges.
We want government to help us help these women who are running these programs to be able to take all the legal dumping spaces, allow people to have PTO, permission to occupy, because it's pointless you cleaning up a spot that's dirty, building whatever, and then the government coming to tell you you don't own this land, eradicate. Majority of the people in our townships that run ECDs for more than 20 years, run ECDs in shacks, run ECDs in flats, run ECDs in houses. That's not normal. So basic education needs to step in.
Nyovani says assistance from government is needed to make ECDs work effectively in Langa.
And we want government to actually understand we don't have a problem with government. We're just here to help. We do not need funding. We need fencing around here. We need structures. For instance, if we could get 5 containers, we'd probably start our own ECD here. We'd probably employ our own people here. Our parents and our sisters can't be employed outside Langa. So our main goal is to be able to create these new early childhood developments in our community.
Letoya Mnana is a volunteer who helps children with literacy education in Langa after school hours. She says an aftercare center is needed.
What's necessary is a space for them to learn, a space. We are living in crowded areas as families, as a community. So there's no space for them to at least go home to do their homework, to be listened to present, to do their homeworks. So I do believe that government should support these children with at least a space. There was one place here around, but it's shutting down. It's not catered for everyone. But in this times, these children need at least a place where they can say, no, I've got a place. Because first of all, libraries close exactly the time that they come from school. So they don't have the time to say, I'm going to go do my homework, I'm going to go do or study.
While his child gauge report focused on ECD, the Children's Institute says the 2025 investigation will explore the intersections of violence against women and children.
And that's because we know that violence against women and children tends to happen in the same household, and that they share the same risk factors. And yet our responses to violence against children and violence against women tend to be very separate and distinct. So we need to think through those intersections in order to better address both forms of violence and to start to disrupt what we call, again, an intergenerational cycle of violence.
Lake says the next child gauge report is expected to be published in August next year. Mercedes Besent, SABC News, Cape Town.